Great, it's 2 o'clock. Welcome everyone to today's Sunshine State Digital Network webinar, Securing Our Collections After a Water Disaster. Today's presentation is being recorded, so you will receive a recording as well as a link to the slides with resources. And the recording will also be available to view on our YouTube channel for the Sunshine State Digital Network. If you have any questions, you can enter them in the chat, but we will save answering those questions until the end of the webinar. And today's presenter is Hannah Wyatt Davis. If you need closed captions, you can go to the More button on your Zoom menu and click on Show Captions, and you'll be able to see live captions. Please excuse any errors as the captions are automated. We do make an effort to correct those for the recording later. Other than that, those are all the housekeeping items. For Q&A, I will allow you to unmute yourself if you would prefer to raise your hand and ask a question that way instead of putting it in the chat. Do just keep in mind that the session is recorded, so that will be available as part of the recording. And without further ado, I will pass it over to our presenter today, Hannah.
Thanks, Kayla. And thanks all of you for joining us today for me to talk to you about salvaging your collections from floods, other water events, things like that. Here we go. Like Kayla was saying, my name is Hannah Wyatt Davis, and I'm the Preservation Program Director at FSU Libraries, Special Collections, and Archives. I have been there for 13 years. I have also been a Floridian my whole life. I've lived through many hurricanes, including, what was it, the big three of Charlie, Jean, and Francis all in one month and a half. Unfortunately, I had the great ability to respond to many water events in my own institution, including a major flood of our main storage area on Christmas night of 2022. Um, just a note about the links that I have in my presentation. I have also provided a list of references to Kayla to send to y'all after this. So anything that's linked in here, you'll be able to click on in that document later on. But yes, I did do a presentation about our holiday flood for the South Florida Archives Consortium. And so if you're interested to learn more about what we experienced in our own flood, I encourage you to watch that presentation. So, what will you learn today? Well, we're going to talk about how to respond to minimize loss of collections during and after a water event, how to assess levels of damage, so how to determine in the moment how bad is it truly. I'll also talk a little bit about how to find resources for help, how to keep your staff safe during a response like this, and how to dry paper materials. I will not be going over how to write a disaster plan, but it is all connected. So some of my slides today will cover disaster preparedness. Um, but there are many great resources out there about writing your own disaster plan, and I encourage you to take a look at that. So, what are some contributing factors to water emergencies? Well, in Florida, we know hurricanes are always a problem every summer and fall. It seems like the last few years we've been very consistently getting a hurricane at least once a year, if not multiple times. We also have very just like crazy rainstorms around the state, especially if our ground is saturated from daily rain. So we'll get flooding. Um, but another weather event that can really affect your collections is cold weather. And that's actually what happened to us at Florida State. And the night that our submasement flooded, we had a pipe burst because we had below freezing temperatures in Tallahassee. And I remember that night, UF also had a pipe burst because of the same problem. And then around FSU's campus, there were 12 other buildings that had pipe bursts that flooded their spaces. Another contributing factors to water emergencies is aging buildings and just deferred maintenance and capital replacement. I found some information about deferred maintenance from a couple of surveys. So, in this 2021 ALA data brief, they said the average public library building is more than 40 years old, including hundreds of buildings that are more than 100 years old. So that's pretty old physical infrastructure and architecture for a building. In a 2021 survey of Florida universities, they said the backlog of deferred maintenance exceeds $1.8 billion, which is a lot of money. And to me, I interpret that as that deferred maintenance is going to be continue to be deferred on and on. So, what are some things you can do before a water event to prepare yourself? Um, this is where we kind of talk about that disaster plan stuff, but it's not that in depth. So the first thing you can do is to find and locate your resources. Uh, One of the first things you can do is create a disaster kit and kind of get your supplies together. You'll want to keep your disaster kit in a centrally located space. Make sure everyone who works with you knows where to find it. You'll want to check your supplies once a year. I suggest either checking your supplies on SAA's May Day, which is at the beginning of hurricane season. Um, but there may be another time of your year that is the best time. So maybe at your fiscal year or the calendar year, just whatever makes sense for your institution to check your supplies, do it once a year. You'll also want to make sure you keep your list of supplies updated, like where they are in your building. And if when you're reviewing your supplies once a year, anything is damaged or expired, I'm thinking like any flashlights with batteries that have gone bad, even little stuff like pens or grease pencils may have dried out. You'll just want to make sure that everything still works because that's the last thing you want to be dealing with in an emergency if you've lost power to your building is finding batteries for a flashlight that doesn't work. You'll also want to put together a list of vendors or contractors that you could potentially use in an emergency. So that could be drying companies, large appliance rentals, and I mentioned that for things like temporary HVAC, dehumidifiers, or even potentially large freezers where you may freeze materials that have become wet. You'll also want to define who your labor pool is, and you'll need to determine who on your staff can and should respond to emergencies. So if you know that you have part-time staff that your institution doesn't pay for their health insurance, maybe you don't want to include them in disaster recovery because it could potentially be harmful to their health. And that's just a like an ethical thing to consider. Anyone who may have mobility issues, they may not do the immediate kind of response, but can do later on drying things. Um, then you'll also want to train your staff on where everything is and how to complete all these tasks and find the disaster plan that you will have researched and done on your own. So the basics of your disaster kit I have listed out here. I just mentioned your institution's emergency plan. If you have an emergency plan for your institution, make sure you print out a copy and put it in a waterproof space and make sure everyone knows where it is. Because most likely, in an emergency, you may have loss of power or are just not in a place where you can bring a computer with you. So you'll just need a book on hand, ready to go. You'll also want to make sure you have a printed out copy of your emergency contact list and make sure that when you're checking your supplies once a year, also check on who is on this contact list, make sure it's up to date. Another thing you're going to need absolutely is tarps or visqueen, and you're going to want to make sure you check for holes. We have a lot of old tarp at my institution that has holes in it, and we discovered during our flood that when we were opening a compact shelving unit to another row, water was coming in from the top of the tarp through a hole, which of course and it wasn't the end of the world at the time, but it certainly wasn't ideal. You're also going to want other absorbent things like paper towels, sponges, or something called a spillo, which is just like a long kind of noodle thing that soaks up a lot of water. You'll also need things like tape, scissors, or knives, flashlights, and batteries. Definitely going to need a lot of trash bags because you're going to create a lot of waste during this process. Um, Other things you're going to need are PPE, so things like nitrile gloves and 95 masks. You may even want to have available coveralls, something I know that you can get coveralls for pretty cheap from something like Granger. Um, and then you're also going to want ways to document what you're finding. And again, I recommend using the analog approach. So doing it on paper with pens, pencils. If you find yourself having to write on furniture, which we did do that in our space, we wrote on the end caps of our rows. We used dry erasers for that. Um, in a flood situation, really, truly, you kind of don't want to have a laptop to deal with at the time. So here's a picture of what our disaster kits look like. They've had my handwriting just scrawled on it, disaster kits 1 and 2. We also have a mold kit. Our disaster kits also have taped on the side of the box what is actually contained within it. So we do have a supply list that we go through once a year. We update where the location of the item is, where you can find it. If it's something like dehumidifiers that we have to ask our facility staff for, we ask them, and we know that it's not a thing we own. We have to ask someone. Um, but we do have this printed, but sometimes even just going through a list in the moment can be difficult. So just having it printed and put on your box can save you minutes, if not even like a half an hour of trying to find a headlamp or something like that. So before an emergency, you're also going to want to determine what are your salvage priorities. So think to yourself, what's the first thing you would grab out of your flooding building? You may want to think about some materials in your collections that have institutional or cultural importance. Maybe you're also thinking about rarity or monetary value. If you have materials that have potentially touchy donor agreements, or like maybe the donor is still alive and maybe they continue to donate monetarily, maybe that's just something to consider. And of course, you'll want to think about what's more susceptible to water damage. So in our collections, we prioritized paper documents, and we did have a lot of materials that were artifacts like trophies and um, china sets like dinnerware, flatware, things like that, that we're like, this is not going to be affected by water in the same way as this onion skin documentation that we need to dry immediately. Uh, Once you have defined the priorities of for salvage, you're going to want to put them in a place that everyone can find them. So document your priorities, put them in your disaster plan. You can also put information in your finding aid or catalog records, anywhere you keep information about your collections. You can also mark their physical locations with high visibility markers like glow in the dark or high vis tape, stickers, signs, anything that you may visually be able to see in an emergency and say, ah, yes, we need to get this box out of this row. This is this is salvage priority number one. And you didn't even necessarily have to look through a list on it. It's just in a big glow in the dark sign on the end cap of your row. So you'll also want to train your staff, of course. You're going to need to go through your disaster scenarios with staff. I would recommend once a year. If you work in a high turnover sort of institution that for instance, if you hire like students or people who just maybe just moving on through their career quickly, um, just make sure you train with your staff once a year. Um, Make sure also they are apprised of any updated internal disaster guidelines. So if you've decided, oh, we're going to do this thing a little differently, um, make sure everyone knows that you're doing it differently. Because in the moment, if no one knew that you're doing it differently, it's going to be done the old way. I have personally found that hurricane preparation has been a great time to run through our disaster plan. We've had to prepare for pretty much every year. And it's just a great way to keep it refreshed so you can find everything. You know how to put stuff up, you know how to be careful about it. Um, so, yeah, once a year, go through your stuff. This is something that maybe you don't have as much control over, but if you are in a position over furniture budgets or things like that, or have an opportunity to do furniture refreshes, architectural refreshes, um, give this some thought. Consider your storage furniture and housing. We found in our flood that the we were calling them modules. They were essentially just compact shelving, but they had a roof on them. And because they had a roof, the water went over the sides of it instead of down through the shelving. And while you can see in this self-help smiles book, there's water damage on the text spine. The actual text block was not affected at all. We also discovered that archival boxes, did a really great job of keeping water out. Um, Especially if you have the opportunity to buy a little more expensive, but absolutely worth it, water repellent boxes. Those are great. We were finding that even though a box may be wet, the materials inside were not wet at all, or maybe we're just slightly damp. Foldering materials also really helped because the folder would absorb moisture and not the actual material. So, what do you do during a water event? The first things you need to think about is maintaining safety for yourself and your staff. Make sure you're even like cleared to go into your building before you respond to a disaster. There may be electrical hazards. It's potential that if there's flooding, there may be sewage or other biological hazards in your building. Even if the depth of water is too deep, it could potentially hinder an immediate response. Um, Something else to consider if you have a water emergency due to something like a hurricane, you're going to really need to think about, is it even safe to travel to your location? One time we had a power outage because of tornadoes that took out part of our city. And it was marginally dangerous getting to campus that day only because the lights were out. And it wasn't even flooded, it wasn't even particularly bad traffic. But if you are in a situation where your roads are covered in trees or down power lines, like don't it's more important to stay safe and let the stuff get wet than potentially risk your own life getting to your materials. So once you're cleared to go into the building, you're all the roads have been cleared. Um, Make sure you're wearing safe clothing and PPE. When I say safe clothing, what I mean is non-slip, closed-toed shoes. So no sandals, definitely no flip-flops. Um, Boots are kind of great. I wore rain boots when we were looking at our basement. Um, Long pants and long shirts can be really helpful. We were finding this was a problem because the ceiling tiles above us were starting to disintegrate and they had fiberglass in them. So we were trying to minimize any potential contact with fiberglass tiles. Um, Similarly, a hat can be really nice if anything is coming from above you, like water or ceiling tiles, or what we were affectionately calling ceiling goo. You're also going to want to have gloves to handle materials because it's very possible mold spores may have started to germinate. Um, Fortunately, like hopefully you'll have caught it before then, but depending on how quick your response is, you may need more of that kind of PPE. I didn't include this on here. Also, if you are seeing any signs of mold, immediately put on an N95 respirator. You may also want to wear coveralls, just if it's like a particularly gross response. I'm thinking about, I don't know if any of you ever saw pictures from Apple Shop up in Kentucky when they had one of their big floods. There's this amazing picture of one of their archivists covered in um, completely covered in mud, and he had like a hazmat like mask on, a hazmat suit, and it was filthy. Like it was really amazing photo. Um, the last thing I want to say about maintaining safety is don't put people in elevators. If you're having a water response in your building and you have elevators, they will go out. So, if you need to put materials in elevators and have someone kind of go in and punch the button and back out of it, and then someone is on the next floor grabbing the cart, that's fine because if materials get stuck in there, oh well. Um, but if your coworkers get stuck, or you, that's not great. So, all right, you're in the building, you're in your PPE. What do you do now? You're going to assess the situation. You're going to want to find out where your water is coming from. So, if it's a pipe burst, do you need to turn the water off? Is it a completely like, I don't know, is the ceiling caved in? Is it coming from below? Um, just find out where it is because there may be a way to at least stop the water from coming into your building. Determine if it's critical to move your materials immediately. You may have flooding in your building, but it hasn't necessarily affected where you store your materials yet. So if they seem like they're safe staying where they are, uh, leave them. You'll also want to determine how much help will you need to move materials if you do end up moving them. And how and where are you going to move them to? This was something that we had to consider a lot because we actually didn't really have any open spaces to dry materials. We shut down our reading room for a semester because every single table, every day had materials drying on it. And um, we didn't have anywhere else to put them. So, if you have determined that your materials are in danger of becoming wet, um, you may also want to ask yourself, should I tarp this material or do I need to just completely move it? Tarping materials, it is great because it provides immediate coverage, unless you have holes in your tarp like we did. Um, but it is a lot of labor, and it may require you to go on a ladder, which can be kind of unsafe in a slippery, wet and wild situation like a flood. You may not have enough tarp to cover the entire affected area. And if you leave it up too long, it can create a microclimate. And also, it can collect water on the top, which, if it moves a certain way, maybe you just pour water on your head. Moving materials out of harm's way, though, you can avoid damage altogether. But it also depends on, do you have enough carts or hand trucks to move things? And do you have a place to put them? Do you have to use an elevator to move the stuff out of the way? Or are you going to have to use stairs? Is it going to become intensely laborious for you to move things? Um, you'll just have to like consider the trade-off between tarping and moving materials. We found that we could employ the best of both worlds. So we actually moved a lot of materials to carts in the space and tarped those. So there was stuff coming down. There was the waterfall coming down. So we just grabbed everything out of that section, and then we were able to tarp and move it out of the way. And that didn't require us to go on any ladders or anything like that. So um, you can you can kind of zhuzh it to the best scenario for your institution. So while you're dealing with all of this, you need to make sure you're documenting everything. You'll want to start a document and share it with every potential stakeholder. So that could be your boss, your boss's boss. If you are like in a governmental institution, I don't know if there's like board members that you maybe need to talk to. We had to keep a lot of documentation for university administration and our facilities team, but we also were ending up providing a lot of documentation to vendors that were coming in and doing remediation work for us. In this documentation, you'll want to make sure you are indicating what decisions you made and who made them and when and why. You'll want to also document who's working on the response and for how long, because you'll want to make sure people get paid for the labor that they are doing to make sure your materials stay safe. Um, you're going to want to document any supplies that were thrown away. This is really good for insurance purposes. And you'll also want to just make sure you give observations of what your immediate damage looks like. Um, we did a lot of this by taking photos. So we had a list of notes, but we also just had a folder that everyone was putting their photos in. And it was kind of the best of both worlds because you didn't have your nose in a book writing down everything that you were seeing. Um, and then you had a nice reference point to go back to later. Or conversely, you have a great presentation fodder for later. I also want to stress that dealing with a flood like this it's a marathon. It's at the time you're going to have a lot of adrenaline and anxiety and you're going to just feel like I got to go, I got to do this. But it's going to become a grueling long process. So don't push yourself too hard right away. Like just don't. This will help you prevent injuries as well. If someone is just going too fast on a ladder, they may slip. You don't want to injure your back or neck from lifting or twisting in a certain way because you're just not really thinking about it. You will want to prevent burnout because in the moment it feels like okay we fixed the flood, like we moved everything, but you actually have months of work ahead of you to do drawing and reprocessing. So yeah, don't spend all of your energy in that moment. Um, all of this too could potentially damage materials. I'm thinking if you're holding a really big box and you're going through a door and maybe you whack the door frame and that box is already wet and potentially you have now physically damaged materials because the door frame hit the box just right and it crumpled. Um, so yeah, it's be mindful about how much you're pushing yourself. Something to consider too, if you're overwhelmed, you're not alone. There are resources for you to contact. Um, FEMA has a disaster assistance hotline. Another great one is the Northeast Document Conservation Center. They are available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I actually called them and they were very helpful on providing me like guidance in the moment. AIC also has the National Heritage Responders. So if your institution is part of something bigger that's like an Apple shop kind of situation where you have had a flood and your entire town is at risk, the NHR may be the right person to call, and they are equipped to deal with those more hazardous sort of responses. So you've responded to your water event, the water's been shut off, it's the next day. What are you going to do? So, first, you want to assess your damage. I recommend using the NEDCC scale that is posted here. So dry, damp, slightly wet, and wet. So you'll want to review all of your materials and assign categories of wetness. If it's dry, then it's dry and you move on. If something feels a little damp, but it doesn't exhibit tide lines, which tide lines you can see illustrated in the top photo of this slide. Um, that's a real clear indicator that something has had water damage. Um, that's also something to note, but kind of move on. If something's slightly wet, has some staining from water, but just in smaller areas, that's maybe like a pull out, but not necessarily deal with right now. And if something is wet that has significant staining, it's completely saturated, uh, pull off the shelf and deal with it then. You're also going to want to figure out how you're going to dry your materials. If you have the resources to freeze materials, um, that's great. I wish we could have done that. Um, Air drying, like I was saying, it takes up space because you're going to literally just be spreading things out over whatever surface you possibly have available to you. Um, you may want to determine what is your trade-off, like how many materials could you possibly air dry before you decide, oh, actually freezing is best for us. I have seen some numbers about this before. I don't remember what they are exactly, but I personally feel like it's on an institution to institution basis of air drying versus freezing. Um, because a lot of that also comes down to what kind of budget you have for emergency response. You're also going to want to figure out what supplies you'll need for triage. And where are you going to be doing this work and who will be working on it? Um, and like I was saying with freezing before, figure out what contractors you might need. Hopefully, you'll have some already written down in your disaster plan. But contractors you may need to contact are like drying companies. We use some local place that's called All Drying Systems. And they came and set up fans and dehumidifiers, the big like industrial kinds. You may also decide to freeze your materials, and they'll bring a freezer truck to your building and move all of that stuff. You may also want to contact a whole disaster response company. If you are finding mold in your books, which can happen very quickly, especially in Florida, you may want to sooner rather than later have a company come and take those books so they can do mold cleaning on them. So if you've decided you're going to do some air drying, and you're ready to start your salvage, let's do it. Um, Make sure you inventory all of your damaged materials. You'll want to include any information about the item, what damage you've observed, where it was originally located, so shelf locations, information about like what building it may have been in, whatever is important for you guys to find where you put stuff. You'll also want to have information about who triaged the item and when it was actually triaged. Um, Also, you're going to want to secure your area for mold growth. I mentioned earlier microclimates, and I'm going to talk about that a little more in a second, but that can be a big contributing factor to mold growth is if you have a microclimate in your space. You'll also want to set up fans to circulate air and dehumidifiers, and then you can start drying your materials. Okay, so microclimates. Uh, the AAM defines microclimates as any space within a larger one where conditions differ. So this could mean anything like an archival box or an exhibit case, picture frames. Picture frames were a big problem that we experienced in our flood. Um, Even like nooks and crannies where your airflow may be stagnant. Like maybe you have a corner where your ductwork just doesn't make it all the way there and the air doesn't circulate as well. It's just, it feels stagnant. Mold will grow rapidly in a microclimate. As you can see in this photo here, this is like a picture frame example. This happened like in a day. That was the perfect climate for it because it had fabric and had a back on it, and it was just containing that moisture. Um, and we were finding that with all of our picture frames. So that's kind of a bummer. But you could also potentially use a microclimate to your advantage. So we actually built microclimates. We covered our compact shelving modules with tarps and put in one of those large industrial dehumidifiers so we could decrease the humidity and air circulation in a smaller space. So we did this in each module, and it was actually very successful. We were able to bring the humidity down and dry books out very quickly, dry boxes. Um, Anything that was like externally affected by water was left in there and it dried out quickly, like within a day. I don't know too much about freezing materials, I'll be quite honest with you, but if you have too many materials to air dry, you may consider freezing your collections. It will prevent mold growth and any further warping. The freezer must maintain temperatures at or below 0 degrees. You can use a chest or upright freezer. There are also companies that have freezer trucks or portable units that you can rent. After a few weeks, you or a company can air dry or vacuum freeze dry materials. I have included in that list of resources more information about freezing and drying wet books and records. Uh, However, if you have AV materials, do not freeze them because it is bad for the format. So now what? It's a long road. We are still dealing with flood stuff in my institution. It is now almost 4 years later. Um, and all you can do at the time is communicate the plan with your staff and your patrons. So if you are going to have to close reading rooms or spaces or limit access to materials, just make sure everyone knows, be very transparent. Hey, this thing is not available. And people will say, okay, great. That's too bad, but we'll find it somewhere else. If you need to limit or delay access materials, that's also an option. We were doing some remediation and then making it available 24 hours later to our patrons. You may need to suppress records in your catalog or finding a database. And then you're going to start talking more about repairing and renovation needs. So if you do have a large scale flood that has potentially damaged your floor, your subfloor, any of your shelving, furniture, um, you'll need to talk about getting that repaired before you can put stuff back in there. You may even want to consider, do we want to put stuff back in this space at all? Um, And then you're also maybe going to talk about moving materials to another storage location. In our instance, we had 15,000 linear feet of special collections material in that sub-basement area that got flooded. It now all lives in Iron Mountain because we do not have the space to put it anywhere else. And they have completely gutted, and um, plans to renovate it have been very slow. So there's just nowhere else to put it. So it may be that you contract with something like Iron Mountain, or maybe you just rent a storage unit in town that is climate controlled. Just kind of depends on how much of your material was affected. So that's the end of my presentation. If you ever have a water or just like any emergency scenario, feel free to contact me. Any DCC is a much better resource, though. But if you want any advice on the kind of aftermath of it, I'm always happy to talk to you about salvaging your collections. Um, this is also a QR code to the resources that will be sent out by Kayla after this. So you can scan it now or wait for it for later. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Hannah. So if you have um, any questions, you can either put them in the chat or you can uh, raise your hand and unmute yourself. Does anyone have questions for Hannah? Well, we give people a second. I mean, I was not as heavily involved in the flood recovery as you were, but I do remember doing stuff for that. That was an all hands on deck situation. Um, and it also brought back, as you were talking, memories of I read a book called The Library Book by Susan Orlean a few years ago, and it was about the fire that happened at the LA Public Library. And a lot of the damage to the collections from that was from the putting the fire out from the water. Um, and they had a massive effort to help dry these materials, including freezing them. But they had
Hmm.
these warehouses where they had volunteers come in and like help dry books out. Um, so there's lots of reasons that your books might get wet, but
Yeah, I would take a flood over a fire any day, to
well,
be
yeah.
honest.
Yes.
um, yeah, that is a really remarkable tale, though, of their response to that fire.
Okay. Well, hopefully everyone feels like they can now take on a water disaster, because it doesn't seem like anyone has questions. But um, you were very thorough. So um,
Oh, there's one. Olivia.
yes, go ahead.
Yes, hello. Um, I missed a little bit at the beginning, so it might have been answered previously. But My previous institution, it was a little bit slow from like our director to kind of get involved with disaster planning. So I was going to say, how would you, or are there any like ways to kind of encourage like people who are on that level to get involved with like disaster planning? Because we hadn't had an updated plan in probably like 5, 10 years.
Wow, that's a great question. Oh, how do I answer this? Because so yeah, you needed an updated one, and it does take a lot of effort from various stakeholders to put one together. Um, I don't know if you have had a any sort of emergency thing happen in your institution, but I think that starting from the like a cost benefit analysis is a good place to start. And you can tell them to contact me because it has now been several million dollars to deal with the collections since this flood. So I only talked about special collections, but we also had general collections in this space. And because they prioritized dealing with our materials immediately, general collections got completely wiped out with mold. So they were sent to Texas, and they have been now been stored off site for years. And so that contract alone was at least $1 million. Our Iron Mountain contract, which we are now in our fourth year of, also very expensive. And then the just actual renovation of the space is going to be several million. So maybe maybe start from that point where you are enacting a cost saving measure by planning for disaster.
Mm, got it. Thank you.
You can also just write it and say, this is what we're doing.
Does anyone else have questions? Well, I hope everyone can join me in thanking Hannah for her wonderful presentation. Um, I feel very grateful to work with someone who has this level of expertise. I'm sorry that you've had to get it under the circumstances that you have, but I think it is very valuable, and we appreciate you sharing it with us today.
Yeah, thanks all for coming.